So I'm told a good teacher, I'm not claiming I'm a good teacher, a good teacher will begin by telling you what they're going to teach you, then they will teach you, and then they will tell you what they taught you. So, what I'm going to teach you this morning, we're going to take our text from Exodus 14. We're not going to read clear through the thing. You'll see where I stop and then I jump off on the teaching portion. And the teaching portion is going to apply to circumcision. And ladies, don't tune out because you're going to be fully involved with this too. So, Exodus 4, beginning with 14. Then Yahweh's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "Isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know he can speak well." Moses was complaining that he wasn't able to speak well, so he was hoping that God would choose somebody else to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. "I know he can speak well, and also he is on your way to meet you now. He will rejoice when he sees you, and you will speak with him and tell him what to say. I will help both you and him speak, and will teach you both what to say. He will speak to the people for you, and he will be your spokesman, and you will serve as God to him. Now take this staff in your hand that will perform these signs with." Then Moses went back to his father-in-law Jethro and said to him, "Please let me return to my relatives in Egypt and see if they are still living." Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." Now in Midian, Yahweh told Moses, "Return to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are now dead." So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took God's staff in his hand. Yahweh instructed Moses, "When you go back to Egypt, make sure you do all the wonders before Pharaoh that I have put within your power. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you will say to Pharaoh, 'This is what Yahweh says: Israel is my firstborn. I told you, let my people go, or let my son go, so that he may worship me. But if you refuse to let him go, I will kill your firstborn son.'" Now this is the part that is very strange to me. I've struggled with this passage forever. It's like God put this little passage in. It's a total random thought, had nothing to do with the text, what we were reading, and what we will be reading afterward. On the trip overnight at a campsite, it happened that Yahweh confronted Moses and sought to put him to death. Where did that come from? God just barely said, "Go to Egypt, release my people," and now God's trying to put him to death. What is the point here? So Zipporah, this is Moses' wife, took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and threw it at Moses' feet. And then she said, "You are a bridegroom of blood to me." So Yahweh let him alone. And at that time she said, "You are a bridegroom of blood." She was referring to the circumcision. Did Zipporah understand circumcision? I don't believe she did. And why did Moses not circumcise his son on the 8th day, as was the command very early on? I think, like Zipporah said, "You're a bridegroom of blood to me." All she saw was the physical aspect of it, this filthy, bloody thing, and she threw it at Moses' feet. Well, let's backtrack a little bit and see some of the history of what circumcision is about. Genesis, God said to Abraham, "As for you and your offspring throughout your generations, you are to keep my covenant. This is my covenant which you are to keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every one of your males must be circumcised. You must circumcise the flesh of your foreskin to serve as a sign of the covenant between me and you. Throughout your generations, every male among you at 8 days old is to be circumcised. This includes a slave born in your house, one purchased with money from a foreigner, the one who is not your offspring, a slave born in your house, as well as one purchased with money, must be circumcised. My covenant will be marked in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. If any male is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that man will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." Pretty strong words. Yahweh knows what he's talking about. And he commanded that all Israel, all the servants, the slaves, born in, born out, that are a part of Israel, be circumcised. Why didn't Moses circumcise Gershon at 8 days? That's a question I can't answer. But the fact that he didn't, God was set out to kill Moses because he had disobeyed the command of God to circumcise your child 8 days old. Zipporah was obviously not understanding the whole covenant thing. It was a bloody mess to her, and seemed like she was angry when she threw it at Moses' feet. to say you're a bridegroom of blood to me. Well, Genesis, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all the slaves born in his house and purchased with money every male among the members of Abraham's house, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskin on that very day, just as God had said. Now Abraham was 99 years old when the flesh of his foreskin was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13 years old when the flesh of his foreskin was circumcised. On the same day, Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised, and all the men of his household, both born slave and free in the house, and those purchased with money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. I knew a guy, he was in his 40s at the time. He had apparently not been circumcised as a child. He felt very convicted by the Holy Spirit that he needed to have it done. This is a guy in his 40s. Here it said Abraham was 99 years old. This guy, his name was David. He went through a miserable 10 days after this circumcision was performed, 40 years old. Now, thankfully, if you follow the commandment at 8 days old, you never remember it. When my wife and I were married in 1980, we had our first son 16 months later. Well, everything went well. We were getting ready to leave the hospital, and the doctor says, "Oh, we want to circumcise him before he leaves." And I said, "No, I'll be back in 8 days." And he goes, "No, we're just going to do it now." I says, "No, this is a religious thing with me." Oh, and he backed right off. Well, I decided not to go back to that doctor because he was an unbeliever. He didn't know or care. I went to my cousin-in-law. He was a urologist, and he'd been performing circumcisions and everything urology related for years. So I went to him and I said, "Would you circumcise our oldest son, Corey?" It was on the 8th day, and he says, "Yep, not a problem." He's a believer. He understood the covenant. He said, "Yep, bring him in," and we took him to the hospital. And I said, "Dr. Crouch, I want to watch." And he says, "No, you don't." I says, "Actually, I do. I'm a real curious kind of a personality. I would like to watch." And he took me by the shoulders and he said, "Trust me, you don't want to watch." He says, "I'll let you stand outside in the hall with the door open, but you may not look in." So, okay, he's the doctor. I stood out in the hall, and in a few moments, I heard the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard in my life. And I began to realize, I'm glad I didn't watch that. But it was a covenant of blood, a blood sacrifice. God's covenant being fulfilled by, thankfully, a Hebraic believer. I was real happy that my cousin-in-law is a Hebraic believer. So I felt totally at peace with that. And, the little kid bounces back after a few days and never remembers it, which is a great thing. So it's interesting, the 8th day thing. Why did God talk about the 8th day? Well, in 1930, a Danish researcher named Heinrich Dahm and an American researcher named Edward Doisy found that which was required to clot blood. And they both shared a Nobel Prize for medicine in 1943. The human body has 2 blood clotting elements. One is called vitamin K. Vitamin K is not formed in the body until the 5th to the 7th day. The second clotting factor, which is essential, is called prothrombin. It, surprisingly enough, develops to 30% of normal by the 3rd day of life. After that, which is seemingly in consequence, it peaks to 110% on the 8th day of life, just before leveling off at 100% of normal. You think God knows what he's talking about when he said circumcise on the 8th day? He said a child could bleed to death if he was circumcised before that. So God knows what he's talking about. He's a very practical God. And interesting, circumcision is one of the most common surgeries done worldwide today. In the United States alone, the rate of circumcision is up to 80%, while globally it's about 38%. So even non-believers, there's a lot of health reasons to have it done too. So what we have here now with the mandate of a physical act that results in a spiritual transformation. Can you think of another institution that God has created that results from a physical act that turns into a spiritual transformation? How about baptism? I have often thought when I've witnessed a baptism, I would love to see what is happening in the spirit when somebody is physically being immersed in water. There's got to be some spiritual transformation right there, even though it looks like they're just getting dunked and then they come up and, hey, hallelujah, I'm done. There's something in the spirit that's changed. And to me, it's the same thing with circumcision. Now, just because a person is circumcised, it doesn't mean he's automatically serving God. There is still a choice involved. And we'll read that a little bit later on. But getting back to the command to the Israelite males, even in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, God says, it's not the circumcision of the flesh that I'm really interested in, it's the circumcision of the heart. And this not only applies to males, this applies to females too. So let me read a couple of the passages about that. This is in Jeremiah. So women are now included in circumcision. Oh, surprise, surprise. Okay, Yahweh says, circumcise yourselves to me, remove the foreskin of your hearts, men of Judah and residents of Jerusalem. Otherwise my wrath will break out with fire and burn with no one to extinguish it because of your evil deeds. Deuteronomy, therefore circumcise your hearts and don't be stiff-necked any longer. So, he's telling us that we have to do this to ourselves, and yet it's not fully us that does it. It's the Holy Spirit with it. We'll read some passages in that. So in Deuteronomy it says, Yahweh, God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, and you will love him with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And then Jeremiah again, circumcise yourselves to Yahweh, remove the foreskin of your hearts, men of Judah and residents of Jerusalem. So it's a twofold thing. We have to circumcise our hearts, and yet we have to have God's help to circumcise our hearts because we cannot do it by ourselves. And yet he won't do it for us without our effort to obey and serve, and yet we have to make the choice. So what does circumcision of the heart really look like? Well, Paul weighs in. He said, circumcision benefits you if you observe the Torah. But if you're a lawbreaker, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Therefore, if you are an uncircumcised man that keeps the law's requirements, will his circumcision not be counted as circumcision? A man who is physically uncircumcised, but who fulfills the Torah, will judge you who are a lawbreaker in spite of having the letter of the law and circumcision. For here's just an interesting statement. For a person is not a Jew who is one outwardly, and true circumcision is not something visible in the flesh. On the contrary, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, capital S, not the letter, that man's praise is not from men, but from God. The Spirit is going to circumcise our hearts with our help. We have to be willing to jump in and be a part of that. So here's some of the attributes or the display to me of a circumcised heart. And you're all familiar with this one. Deuteronomy 6, listen, Israel. Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. Love Yahweh your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. That's, to me, an evidence of circumcision of the heart. Here's another one. But love your neighbor as yourself. Now this command is written 8 different times throughout the New Covenant. Paul talks about it, Matthew talks about it, Luke talks about it, James talks about it. They talk about this commandment much more than love Yahweh your God with all your heart. I can love God. It's real easy to love God. Sometimes I have a problem loving you. In fact, as I question my Christianity sometimes on the road when they've got so many bonehead drivers out there, they'll just pull right in front of you. So obviously my heart isn't fully circumcised if I get upset with other drivers in this Central Oregon area. So, okay, here's another demonstration of circumcision of the heart. Honor your father and mother. Love your neighbor as yourself. For we know that our old selves are crucified with him in order that sin's dominion over the body may be abolished, so that we may be no longer enslaved to sin. And here's another evidence. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faith, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Now, those who belong to the Messiah, Yeshua, have crucified the flesh with its affections and lusts. And if a man says, I love God and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? That's why it's easy to love God and not you sometimes. Because I see you, but I don't see God. So I just see what he's done, which is a great thing. So, and James says, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widow in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted or unstained from the world. So these are things that are on our account. We have to strive to keep ourselves unspotted from the world. God won't do it for us. He'll give us the power, but it's a twofold thing. It's a hand in hand. He does his part, we do our part. And Romans, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. A sacrifice hurts. As I witnessed my son being circumcised I was out of sight, but I sure heard it verbally. Oh, that scream I'll never forget. It hurts. It's a sacrifice. And that was a one-time event. A living daily sacrifice, which we're living, is a daily event. We're dying daily, Paul says. So I urge you, brothers, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual worship. And don't be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you may discern what is good and pleasing and the perfect will of God. So, my friends, this kind of sums it up. My dear friends, as you have always obeyed, this is Philippians, not only in my presence, but now even more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is working in you, enabling you to both desire and to work out his good purpose. There was a song that came to my mind the other night. I was kind of praying about what I was going to be talking about. And it's a chorus of a song from the 70s. I hadn't thought about it in years, and I think the Lord just dropped it into my mind. And it kind of sums up this whole little thing. I'm just going to sing just the chorus. Put your hand in the hand of the man who stilled the water. Put your hand in the hand of the man who calmed the sea. Take a look at yourself and you can look at others differently by putting your hand in the hand of the man from Galilee. Isn't that it? Put your hand in his hand. Call on him. You'll see your brother differently than without that. So anyway, in Yeshua's name. Yeah.